Right. Joining me is Kristy Perano. You haven't been on the show in months, but we're happy to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
So, you were talking amongst the two of us about things that have been happening in the world. I think the one of the big things that's happened is recently was Turkey has dropped its opposition to Sweden being admitted to NATO. Finland has also joined NATO. But I think you might be wanting to talk about at what cost, particularly to like have the Kurds been thrown under the bus as a result of this?
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, right now, like the details like are not we don't really know what Sweden gave up in order to or whether this was all just for political theater and whether Sweden was already always going to join. But Erdogan certainly has not been a fan of the Kurds at all. I mean, is it fair to say that Erdogan like has a goal of like taking off a slice of northern Syria in order to massacre the Kurds there?
yeah, I think so. I mean, when in 2019, when the Trump administration withdrew U.S. troops from the Kurdish areas in Syria, I mean, Erdogan, like within hours or at least within a day, was in there. And I mean, Turkey can say what they want about how they're allies in the war on terror, but the reality is that they were like attacking the Kurds and then facilitating the release of ISIS prisoners, which is not consistent with their stated with well the objectives that they tell the Western world. And I think there's been credible reports for years that a lot that Turkey has been supporting a lot of these militia type things in Syria, and some of those are like Al Qaeda based or former ISIS guys or whatever. So yeah, Turkey has would rather work with ethnic groups they prefer with affiliations to Al Qaeda and ISIS than to make peace with the Kurds. So yeah, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Turkey has very bad ambitions when it comes to northern Syria.
Right. And I was actually watching this documentary that was arguing that had the Kurds been given a state after World War One, that it would have looked very different from like a lot of Arab states because apparently the Kurds practice a very moderate form of Islam and they believe particularly in women's participation in public life, unlike a lot of Muslims. So that so like if the Kurds had to say they would have looked very different from much of the Middle East. Like kind of like Israel looks very different from much of the Middle East.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, it's always hard to say what exactly would have happened if something that didn't happen would have happened. But I mean, from what we've seen of the Kurds, I mean, they're much more interested in a more democratic type of government, and their values are more consistent with like Western values, and that's part of the reason that they oftentimes ally with the West, and because they have more their sort of views of an ideal society, I think, are more Western than some of the other groups in the Middle East. But that's also why ISIS and groups like that hate them so much. I mean, some of that is like long standing ethnic tensions, but some of it is ideological too, where the Kurdish groups are very fundamentally opposed to the like extremism.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean, there's always like a range of individuals and viewpoints and stuff within any ethnic group, of course, but I mean, there's not a history of Kurdish groups attacking Western ones that Western the U.S. or other Western powers that have come there and allied with them. They've always been very good at supporting that and making a lot of sacrifices themselves, as opposed to just like thanks for your money and then doing other things behind your back that is not what the West is trying to accomplish.
Yeah, for sure. And you're just connecting, all of this to what's happening, in Europe. The whole reason why this is happening is because the Russians have been invading Ukraine. And I don't know if you've been following the latest developments. I kind of have been falling off that train just because Ukrainians right now are not reporting what's going on like they were before because they're engaged in the counteroffensive. How specifically, what what are you following? Like what's going on? Like, is there anything happening that we should know, be aware of?
There's some reports in the last couple of days of like possible Ukrainian drone activity taking out some like Russian assets. But yeah, I mean, and then the pro because of this sort of like lack of real-time information on what's going on, then there's lots of opportunities for the pro-Russian and the pro-Ukrainian guys to say, oh, well, obviously our side's winning. But I mean, I certainly hope that the Ukrainians will have an effective counter-offensive, even if it's not quite as, even if it doesn't happen quite as quickly as they'd hoped. I mean, I would hope that it's going reasonably well, even if not perfectly.
Right. And people were expecting like I think a quick like blitzkrieg because of what happened last year. When the Ukrainians hit hard at Kharkiv, pushing the Russians back, hitting a second time at Kherson and liberating that city. This is not going to be anything like that.
Yeah, it seems like it's become, I mean, more of like trench warfare on both sides. But also I think that the Russians, I mean, are likely exaggerating the amount of assets they have and stuff. So the Russians may be hurting more in terms of keeping manpower and equipment there than they would like to admit. But yeah, it's difficult for us, even those that want to follow it. It's kind of difficult for those of us, outside of the intelligence community to know exactly what's going on. If you were in the intelligence community, you couldn't talk about it anyway. So there's
Right.
just a little bit of a lack of like publicly available information on some of it.
Yeah. I think to NAFO's disappointment, there's not a lot of info going out there. But I guess I'm just hopping, around the world. You know, people have been saying that the invasion of Ukraine could potentially send a warning shot to Xi Jinping in China, um, against invading Taiwan. There has been a part of me that has wondering whether China might decide to go after an easier target, which is Mongolia. It's a country 4 times the size of Germany, 3 million people. Um, China relies on Mongolia for a large amount of its natural resources. At this point, do you think China would potentially try to push in and like conquer that country because it would be an easy target for them, and it might inspire morale in the PLA to go after Taiwan eventually after potentially being demoralized with what's going on in Ukraine? I'm just playing this out. This might sound like a crazy guy spilling his crazy mind, but to me it makes sense.
I mean, I hope that China it would be more reluctant to attack Taiwan, but I mean, they also could view this as, oh, the West is so focused on Ukraine that now is an opportunity to create more chaos and get less attention. So it's not always, so I mean, one would hope that the way that Western powers have at least somewhat rallied and supported Ukraine would like send a message to other prospective aggressors. But I mean, you can't always assume that these people, these countries and their leaders are going to behave rationally. And then also, I mean, they could see opportunities in the chaos. Yeah, I mean, I know that China has done some stuff. Like there was some military exercise like a few weeks ago where they did like a simulated attack on Taiwan or something. So they've definitely done some eyebrow raising stuff. And yeah, I mean, they may have some other smaller countries in their sights. I think China has tended to be sort of more aggressive economically than militarily, but that may change. I mean, it's definitely done a lot of like trying to exploit African and Asian countries with like predatory loans. So that's kind of been their operating mode for a while. But yeah, I mean, we could end up with a new phase of Chinese aggression where they are more interested in military aggression and not only kind of economic predatory behavior.
I guess I'm the only one who's played out that whole Mongolia invasion in my head. But China has been aggressively economical, like in terms of, and there was a time like 10 years ago where conservatives were attacking foreign aid in the US budget, even though it's such a small amount. In retrospect, should we be like saying we should quintuple the amount of foreign aid that we send so that we can do what China does, which is literally buy these countries?
Well, I guess I don't, I think some of the stuff that China does isn't really ethical. So I don't think that, I mean, I would not advocate for my country to be trying to, like set things up the way China does, where it's like, oh, we give you this loan we know you can't afford, and now we'll just annex all your natural resources. Um, I mean, I think though that foreign aid has to be a balance. It's a tough question because, like, because there are a lot of just like rank and file people that don't really have a say in their government that are suffering in these countries. But then a lot of the foreign aid is not getting to the, poor people it's supposed to be. It's oftentimes, I think, getting, skimmed off and lining the coffers of the usually corrupt government in these countries. So, I mean, I definitely understand the argument.
Yeah, you were talking about what America should do to counter China's Belt and Road.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really advocate for like predatory behavior with loans, but I do think it's actually a difficult question in my opinion, like what the right balance is with foreign aid, because I mean, for us to just give a country money so that they can act counter to our interests and, feed into the corrupt government. I mean, I don't support that, but then I mean, we also have we have countries with large populations of mostly innocent people that are suffering. And then also, if we just ignore this, these countries that may be problematic, but if we just look away and ignore them, then, China's going to step in the gap. So I do think it's a tough question of like how much and how should we do foreign aid. I actually appreciated though that the Trump administration under Nikki Haley's leadership was starting to evaluate like how should we handle countries like Pakistan, because the US is really just both Republicans and Democrats have put up with all kinds of um, stuff from Pakistan, especially when we did have the war in Afghanistan. Pakistan was actively undermining our efforts to establish, democracy or to stabilize Afghanistan, and yet we continue sending them money and pretending that we don't know that they're, that they're fomenting all this terrorism over there. So I mean, I actually think I think the US should be willing to help countries, even if, they're not, even if we know that there's issues, because every country has issues. There's no country that's free of corruption. So I wouldn't say that, oh, unless this country is free of corruption, we shouldn't be helping them. But I think we should be a little bit smarter about how we do it, so we're not just giving people money, even if they're otherwise hostile to US interests.
Speaking of working with countries that have problems, Saudi Arabia. I was just watching this documentary. It was explaining what the issues that Saudi Arabia faces, and I've been what I've been wondering is it worth it for the United States to still be working with the Saudis? Particularly with we basically have a relationship with them because we need oil, but I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. It's arguably not even the case anymore already. So why are we still siding with?
I think a lot of the reason the US is siding with the Saudis is because they tend to not like Iran, and we've sort of decided that Iran is like our number one enemy in the Middle East, and so then we've kind of rearranged other things and worked with some, supposed allies just because they are also like we feel like they're also helping counterbalance Iran. So I think that's a large part of why the US puts up with what we do from the Saudis. But I definitely think like working with Saudi Arabia is an example of a country with a terrible human rights record. I mean, it has one of the worst human rights records in the world. And the US doesn't do a very good job of like basically if a country is a US ally, then we overlook a whole lot in terms of like pretty atrocious human rights records. And I really think the US should do a better job of like holding a higher bar on human rights in terms of our allies should not get a pass. Like if they're like, the second worst world in the country for human rights right behind for like women's rights right behind the Taliban or whatever. I mean, maybe we should be saying something. And there have been some baby steps in Saudi Arabia, I think, on women's rights, I'm not sure about religious freedom. I mean, Saudi Arabia is one of the still one of the worst countries in the entire world if someone, tries to change their religion in terms of just of both like families and the government just like killing them. Um, so yeah, I'm not real sympathetic to covering for the Saudis. I mean, if we want to work with them in some political way, we should at least be able to still say, we're not happy with how you guys treat religious minorities and women and things like this in your country, but it's like we don't want to say that because we don't want to offend them because we want their help counterbalancing Iran. So I think it's disappointing how many countries like that get a pass on human rights issues.
I hate to put you on the spot, Kristy, but I want to debut a segment tonight called Jerusalem Together. Basically, you might have seen that Israel passed its judicial reform bill. Just to give you a bit of a primer here, Israel, like the United Kingdom, doesn't have a written constitution. So it has a court that basically decides what's constitutional or not, based on some pretty arbitrary criteria. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on this development or whatsoever. If not, we could just skip this segment altogether.
So I did see something about Israel's Supreme Court and that issue. I didn't spend a lot of time trying to understand what was going on there, but I did see some news about that.
Yeah. It's been pointed out that I think that President Herzog basically said that the protests and the fierce debate are evidence that democracy prevails in Israel, unlike in a lot of the Middle East. Anyway, well, moving on. Sorry, I was you were giving me that look that said, yeah, let's move on. Like I don't have much to say. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So, what else is happening? Anything else you want to talk about, Kristy?
Um, we've we have well, we've covered a lot of things. I guess it's just a brief update on Afghanistan.
Yes.
I guess there's not really that much news except that the Taliban is horrible, like it has been.
Breaking
I
news.
think
Taliban is horrible.
I mean, I think it's actually like kind of slowly getting worse. I mean, I think and so the Taliban maybe hasn't been as aggressive about like hunting down and murdering people we as maybe they were in the first few months, but now as they're approaching their second anniversary, there seems to be an uptick in that again. The humanitarian situation continues to worsen, and the Taliban is making it is like they're more worried about their extreme ideology than they are getting humanitarian aid. So there have been discussions over whether females can be involved in NGO efforts at all. And well, they also threw out Sweden because there was somebody who burned a Quran in Sweden. So they have now like blacklisted some, Swedish NGOs, I think. And then they've had this ongoing debate with the UN over whether women can work in any capacity, and the UN and any NGOs that were employing women were doing it to reach other women. So it's not like they weren't sending women into work with men or even things that would be considered totally benign in Western culture. The Taliban thinks is bad. I mean, they had women like I think they were supposed to be covering up quite a lot. They were supposed to be working with other women, but even that the Taliban decided was not okay. So yeah, I mean and then the world is kind of getting tired of funding as much too. So it's like we're seeing a decline in funding. The few programs that ever existed are now underfunded, like the World Food Program and UN programs. We've never really got straight answers on how much the Taliban's managing to skim off, but the Taliban is also getting more aggressive about trying to force any group operating there to hire people from the Taliban, and like the UN and stuff is not real happy with that. So it's like the Taliban is continuing to fight with the UN, which was like one of the few sources of any sort of food or aid that they were getting. So yeah, I think they're also fighting more with Iran over water rights on the Helmand River. They've Iran is now threatening to like withdraw their embassy from Afghanistan because they're unhappy about the water rights issue. So it just seems like the humanitarian situation has been horrible the whole time and it is getting worse. And then I think for a while after the Taliban fully came to power, they hunted former allies more aggressively, and then they might have backed off for a while, but they seem to be getting more targeted, like and trying like when they're doing more of these kind of raid things and they tend to be more targeted, like they'll manage to get information on someone and then they'll go grab that person. So there's less of like, doing a sweep of an entire village or whatever, but more of like finding out where someone is and then going and getting that person. Um, so yeah, it's really kind of it's I'm having trouble thinking of any way that Afghanistan is improving, and yeah, maybe things are a little bit more stable than they were in the first few weeks still, but the Taliban is also just increasing their grip on power. It seems like there have been more like rumors of inter-Taliban fighting though, so it may be that there is like maybe that Taliban is not as united as it appears to be. But it's certainly frustrating that the US and Germany and other countries have continued to try to get some Afghans who help them out, but the pace is incredibly slow compared to what they should be doing. And it's like, we don't know how many people even survive for these 2 years, much less how many more years they'll have to survive before they could potentially be relocated. So it
Yeah.
doesn't get a lot of news, but it's definitely a bad situation and not getting better.
Yeah, just to sum it up, the Taliban came to power. As soon as the United States left, the Afghan government collapsed. Taliban comes to power, and surprising absolutely nobody, they've banned women from schools up past grade 6. They've been hunting down people who've worked for the United States military as translators. Translators have been begging for visas. Meanwhile, a goat gets into the United States 10 times faster than a translator. Is that basically the Cliff's Notes version of what's going on in Afghanistan?
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. I think you're thinking of John Oliver's segment where he talks about SAV. I think it was a donkey and not a goat, but yeah, US military was able to like extract a donkey much faster than their own interpreters.
Yeah. Um, Afghanistan, it's the place where empires go to die and apparently people's hopes and dreams as well. Um, yeah,
Yeah, there were some decades ago Afghanistan was actually prosperous, but times have changed. It was the world's worst passport before the government collapsed. So it's like it was the worst country to be born in while things were still much better than they are today.
yeah. And we keep asking ourselves, how is this going to get worse? Like what's going to be the next what's going to be the next straw to drop? You know? Like because girls are still allowed to go to school up until grade 7, so when's that going to change? You know.
Yeah, they also just like closed beauty parlors like a week or two ago. They're just which was only like women doing other women's makeup, probably mostly for weddings and special occasions. I mean, probably not that many Afghans could afford to go on a regular basis, but they decided that they basically want women to have no ability to do anything outside the home, even if they're only working with other women. So yeah, they do manage to they manage to come up with something every couple of months that makes them a little bit worse than they were before. There is more ISIS in Afghanistan activity now, or at least ISIS is claiming that there are some countries that are saying, so the Taliban says that they're doing a great job controlling other terrorist groups. ISIS is not in Afghanistan, but then there were recently some other neighboring countries said, yeah, ISIS is in Afghanistan actually, and ISIS fighters are going from a lot of other countries to Afghanistan to try to reconvene there. So there could be an uptick in ISIS activities in Afghanistan. There could become enough of that it is no longer very easy for the Taliban to deny. But yeah, I don't know what'll happen there or how well they'll be able to control ISIS trying to rebuild in Afghanistan.
So does the Taliban even like ISIS?
They claim not to. They are kind of a rival group. The Taliban also, though, claims to have disowned Al-Qaeda, which they really didn't. So, I mean, some of it, there always ends up being some cross-pollination. I mean, they do claim to be enemies of ISIS, and they do actually, like, they will kill each other between ISIS and the Taliban. But I'm not sure how, like, the Taliban claims that they are doing all this stuff to control ISIS, but it also ends up being a pretty convenient way to get rid of people you don't like, because you can always just like say that they're ISIS. Um, so yeah, I mean the Taliban, so what the Taliban says and what the Taliban actually does is not necessarily consistent, but they are theoretically enemies. And they do, like, they will have shootouts between the two of them, but then I mean, I'm sure that there's some in each group that are sympathetic to the other. Some of the Taliban guys decide that the Taliban's not hardcore enough, so they go join ISIS. So like there is a fair amount of cross pollination between the two also.
Yeah. I have a depressing question. Given that the Taliban is back in power, and given probably the safe haven they're giving to who knows what terrorist groups, what's the next building that's going to have a plane fly into it in the next few years?
I don't know, but I'm not optimistic about like all the countries, including led by the US, who say, "Oh, we have these over the horizon capabilities. We're monitoring everything in Afghanistan." Yeah, I personally think that eventually ISIS is going to strengthen enough to become more of a threat to the Taliban, and then there will be more of a hot war over there.
Oh, so there'll
And
be a
I mean,
civil war in Afghanistan.
potentially, if ISIS gains enough strength and possibly some territory, you could see more of a civil war between, you could end up with a civil war between ISIS and the Taliban, or even between different factions of the Taliban.
Well,
I mean, I'm not
are they going to
hoping.
rebrand themselves as ISA? Because right now they've lost all their territory in Iraq and Syria, so they now have a lot of time on their hands to go pursue this project in Afghanistan.
Yeah, they're officially ISIS-K in Afghanistan, so it's like ISIS Khorasan or something in Afghanistan. So yeah, I don't um so yeah, they have like a slightly different name if they're like Afghan affiliated. I don't think they are really, I think that I'm not surprised to see these reports of ISIS fighters going from other countries to there, because like they're really opportunists. So I think they want to have a caliphate somewhere. So if Afghanistan is the low hanging fruit and is the most expedient place to try to do that, then like that's what they're gonna do. I don't think they're principled enough to say, oh, well, we're supposed to be in Iraq. We can only ever be in Iraq. It's like if Iraq is doing a better job of controlling them and they can just cross a few borders and get to Afghanistan, they're okay with that. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah. There's a lot.
yeah, it is hard to get accurate intel on how much ISIS is in Afghanistan, though, because like obviously there's a lot of Western governments with a vested interest in saying that it's not there. The Taliban has a vested interest in saying that it's not there. Some of the Taliban's neighbors could have a vested interest in exaggerating the ISIS presence. So it really is going to be pretty difficult to get an accurate accounting of how many ISIS, like how capable is ISIS in Afghanistan. But I think any honest observer would admit that it probably or definitely has like increased in strength. I think it's a little hard to predict exactly like how long will it be before ISIS-K could like start actually taking over territory in Afghanistan. That's probably harder to predict, but they have carried out some like pretty complex attacks. They tended to target Hazaras. Like ISIS-K has kind of gone for soft targets so far, and so they've like attacked Hazara mosques and schools and things like that. But then in recent months, they have started like attacking Taliban specifically and like trying to get suicide bombers into mosques where Taliban leaders are and things like this. So they do seem to be, as they're kind of increasing their capabilities, they seem to be more targeting Taliban directly and less like soft targets like Hazaras. But the Hazaras, the Taliban doesn't really like the Hazara people either. And then ISIS also views them as an easy.
You there?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna say you said that the Taliban doesn't like. It would be easier to make a list of the people the Taliban likes. Not that would be a much shorter
Yeah.
list.
Yeah, true.
I'm actually gonna put you on the spot one more time. Let's talk about Thailand. You know that there was an election that took place recently, and the guy who won, he's been unable to win it to form a government. It has something to do with the fact that the military really has a big say there in Thailand, and they're just not willing to let this guy into power.
Yeah, I haven't really followed that a lot. Um, but I mean, it's a common, I think it's a common issue in the having a military that kind of runs the country behind the scenes is definitely a
Or
issue.
overtly like in Myanmar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Do they have to have another election now then? Like in Israel, where you guys just have an election, like 4 elections if you can't get a majority or whatever?
exactly. I mean, possibly I'd have to see what's going to happen, but you know, just for context, like 3 years ago, this Myanmar was in a Thailand situation where the military ran things from behind the scenes. Now they just out and run the country. But
Yeah, and then how long has it been since the Rohingya genocide? That was part of the issue. Oh, yeah, that was part of the issue was that the military was just like going after
yeah,
them.
I
I think
actually
it's been a few years
yeah,
since
I
that
actually
like started.
read that the Rohingya genocide was an example of like how people seen as heroes can just burn all of their goodwill, because there was someone named Aung San Suu Kyi who was the leader of the democracy movement in Myanmar, but when she came to power, she basically did nothing to stop the genocide. So she, from that point onward, a lot of people who like supported her soured on her. You know, like she's not seen well internationally anymore because of that.
Yeah, yeah, I remember. I think hadn't she even gotten like a Peace Prize or something, or yeah, she was at least like well well respected until that happened and she didn't do anything.
Yeah. You know, it's an example of like how goodwill can be burnt up overnight. It's and I mean, the truth is, I mean, Nobel Peace Prize, keep in mind, they gave one of those to Yasser Arafat. So, you know, just to give you like how much it means.
But not to Donald Trump.
Yep. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if they gave one to Obama at some point.
I think here Obama already got one. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure Obama has a Peace Prize already.
Yeah. Again, like people who like say, "Oh, he's got a Nobel Peace Prize." Well, so does Yasser Arafat. So just, so I mean, um, yeah, I think we've is there anything else that we've missed? I know it's been a while, Kristy. So I just
I thought you wanted to talk about Pakistan's nukes as well.
oh yeah. I mean, yeah, you know, we've been talking about this for a few months now, like between since the last episode back in January. But one of the things that you know is concerning to me is that I made a list of the top 5 scariest nuclear regimes. North Korea actually came in fifth because of the relative stability of their regime and the fact that much of what Kim Jong Un says is really just for theater. Number 4 is China, because of their growing militaristic aims. Number 3 is Iran, solely because they don't even have a nuke yet. And something tells me that even if they did, would they really be crazy enough to use it on Israel? You know, knowing they would be retaliated against 80-fold. You know, and um, you know, number 2 is Russia because they're actually engaged in a hot war with Ukraine. So the threat of nuclear annihilation, like in Ukraine, really remains real, or at least the use of tactical nuclear weapon on the battlefield. And then finally, number 1 is Pakistan because of the fragility of the regime and the ties the government has to terrorist organizations, and the fear that if the government has been total collapse, these weapons would just find themselves in the hands of terrorists. In fact, the United States has had a plan in place for years to swoop into Pakistan and secure their weapons, secure their nuclear weapons in the event that the government just collapses.
Yeah, I think Pakistan is really having a lot of social turmoil here. I mean, arguably kind of on the brink of civil war. I mean, you probably were following some of the stuff with the former president that was then arrested for a while, and then his party was going to march on Islamabad, and um, so yeah, I think that it's very concerning, and their economics in Pakistan have continued to get worse, like very high inflation. And so they've had a lot of social unrest just because of the like economic uncertainty. I think they did finally get some IMF loans, or maybe they got some more money from China like in recent weeks. But yeah, I think Pakistan is continuing to deteriorate, like in terms of the stability of the government. So I think it's a very real risk to just like disintegrate, and even the government now is like a lot of them are kind of supportive of these terrorist groups. So, even what you have now is problematic, and I think it's at risk of further collapse.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's really the scary thing is, again, this was they depicted this in a TV show that I watched, but basically the scary thing is terrorists basically being nuclear armed. Like, imagine, we talked about ISIS in a civil war with Afghanistan with the Taliban. Now imagine ISIS with nukes, and just think about how scary that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, hopefully, if the worst happens, the United States can like render safe. I think the plan was known as render safe. They can do that with the nukes like that. Yeah, just add some nightmare fuel to everybody's time before they go to bed tonight. Um, anyway, let's see, moving just across the world. I love our continent hopping that we do whenever we do these shows. Um, there was talk about the potential of conflict, particularly with Russia's decline, the potential of frozen conflicts potentially heating up. We talked about one of those was Azerbaijan's potential like invasion of Nagorno-Karabakh. There is a potential for conflict potentially in the Fergana Valley between Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. There is, I think, a number of other conflicts elsewhere that are at risk of thawing. Apparently there's something in Morocco now that's now heated up. So like all like these frozen conflicts, like they seem to be thawing. We seem to be in an age of thawing frozen conflicts. No, don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. I mean, I guess it's just that we've kind of, I think maybe we're seeing like a faster changes and shifts in power and whatnot, or maybe just sort of ripple effects of Russia deciding to actually invade Ukraine. I mean, it's definitely concerning that if things continue in this trajectory, I mean, we could have like we could be headed towards more war and chaos and not less. I mean, there's kind of a thought that things are supposed to improve as time goes on. We're supposed to become more sophisticated and more able to, work out our differences without shooting each other. But then it's like the reality, the trajectory can be very different than trending towards more peace and stability.
Yeah, no, I mean, my dad, he kind of tells me that he feels sometimes a little bit depressed because the world that he grew up in and the world that that he had, like the time like that came into being like right around the time he had me, um it's collapsing. Honestly, it's particularly with the decline of democracy across the world, and just places like Hungary, El Salvador, places across the world where democratic institutions appear to be under threat, including, quite frankly, the United States as well. Um, you know, like the former president of the United States is going to stand trial, and he's running. He's under indictment. You know, I I'm gonna and just I'm just it just kind of bothers me like how like some of these things that I thought were unthinkable are happening. Like I'm gonna say something controversial, Kristy, which is that we talked about the Taliban, but there are people who work for certain, organizations like the Daily Wire, like Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, who say things that quite frankly are indistinguishable. Like the way that they think, the sometimes like these people I would describe as like the Christian Taliban in the sense that they have very similar views about the role of women in society, that they shouldn't be breadwinners, they should be stay home and have babies, blah 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 blah. You know what I mean, Kristy? You know who I'm referring to, right?
Yeah.
I just it seems like I don't know if these people have always existed and just the internet has been giving them a bigger megaphone, or whether they really are growing in number. But
Mhm.
I guess when I was a kid, I kind of had a prediction that like anti-feminists like and like traditional values would like make a comeback, and like it seems to be happening, honestly.
Yeah, and I think some of it is maybe Twitter giving some of these people more of a platform. There's also kind of, I've seen some Twitter stuff where, well, there's this Andrew Tate guy who was, I think he's like this big anti-feminist guy who then turned out to be like doing illegal stuff, and Romania has now arrested him. But then there are some people that defend him, and it's like he sort of, well, I haven't ever listened to his show, but it sounds like he kind of like starts with some critiques of feminism that maybe are legitimate, and then because there are some feminists that really want to demonize men as well. And so I think some of these people will start with saying, oh well, look, the extreme feminists are wrong, and then so therefore everything feminists have ever said or done is wrong. And I guess I wouldn't consider myself a feminist per se, but then I also think that the well, I mean, I would be a feminist by like decades old standards, and that I think women should be able to work and get paid and participate in society if they so choose, and things like that. But I also don't, but the other extreme of that is that, I don't think marriage is only an institution to exploit women, or some of the things that like the the modern day feminists will say. So I would definitely be somewhere between the extreme feminists and the extreme anti-feminists. But I think both sides kind of start with pointing out like a valid concern and then like running with it to the other extreme. But yeah, I think like at least the like anti-feminists seem to be having their day on Twitter these days. And some of it could even just be tweaks of the algorithm to like show us this stuff. I mean, it's like people that I don't even follow that I like always see their tweets. And it's like, I thought the point of following them, I thought the point of Twitter was that you were supposed to see tweets from people you follow, but now I like see tweets from all these random people I don't follow, and I don't even see the tweets from the people I do follow. So
Christy, maybe you should join me on Threads. Yeah.
when did you join Threads?
Oh, I joined like a few weeks ago.
Okay.
I had an Instagram account, so it let me do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you
Uh,
like it better than Twitter? Or is it about the
it's
same?
it's 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 a nicer, like I don't have like any engagement there, but I'm trying. Uh,
Okay.
but I mean, truth is, I've been getting less and less engagement on Twitter lately, so maybe I don't know. Maybe I should like
Some of it I think is the Twitter algorithms, because like I used to, I don't think I see your tweets anymore. I mean, I'll try to like physically navigate to them, but it's like I used to see your tweets and I don't anymore. And I don't know what is going on with yeah, I don't know what's going on with the algorithm, but I think they're like showing us more and more of the like paid content producers and the like blue checks, the people that are paying Elon Musk to have a Twitter account. Twitter shows us more of them and then less of the like rank and file people. But those are the ones that, I mean, I actually prefer to interact with like other people that are not like content creators and paying for their blue check mark. I'd rather interact with people that are just on Twitter to like a more genuine Twitter
This
people than like
I think that Twitter Blue's slogan should be Twitter Blue because buying a Tesla isn't enough for me anymore. Like Twitter Blue because paying me for a Tesla isn't enough. That should be Elon Musk's like the whole. I don't know. I but yeah. I mean, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. By the way,
I don't know.
yeah, I know because foreign policy seems to be like the focus of what we talk about, as opposed to domestic policy or just culture or anything like that. Um, but did you see like Ben Shapiro throw that tantrum after seeing the Barbie movie?
No, I did not see his
Yeah,
reaction to the Barbie movie. I did not watch the Barbie movie. I've seen all kinds of like people. I've seen a lot of people tweeting about it, but I haven't watched it myself.
I haven't watched it. I don't plan to watch it. But apparently someone posted like Ben Shapiro's quotes of the movie said, "Go woke, go broke," a comedy in 4 acts, starring Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro saying first, Ben Shapiro tweeting, "Go woke, go broke." Then he tweeted that his producers made him watch the movie. It was the worst movie ever. Review up tomorrow. Number 3, the review appears 43 minutes long, entitled Ben Shapiro trashes the Barbie movie. And then number 4 is the news that the Barbie movie sold 155 million on its first day. So apparently, like according to, if Ben Shapiro is to believe, the movie is a piece of woke garbage and it sold 155 million.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt that the appeal of it may very well be that the movie is like as bad as people say, but I mean, I've known people that talked about going to it, and I think it's just there's been a lot of like hype and excitement. I think I think it's probably more just like curiosity as like how do you even make a movie about a toy? I think it's more of just like curiosity because of the sort of the uniqueness of the idea behind the movie than that people are like really that into wokeness per se. But that is a problem with like making predictions is that nobody knows before the movie comes out how much it's going to make, and so if you say, oh well, I don't think I'm going to like this, and so therefore I think it's not going to do well, and then it does do well, then you're obviously it shows your prediction was wrong. Um
Yeah.
but
I don't know if you saw that. Speaking of woke, I don't know if you saw the story. Basically, this is the sequence of events that happened. Ron DeSantis encourages his supporters to boycott Bud Light. His supporters oblige and boycott Bud Light. Bud Light sales take a hit, and then Ron DeSantis says, "Hey, you lost money from our pensions. We're going to investigate you now." Is Ron DeSantis trying too hard?
I mean, I think he's probably trying to compete with Trump by like doing things that grab headlines. That is probably a strategy.
Yeah, his campaign certainly is a strategy. I mean, I've heard comparisons a bit of Ron DeSantis to Scott Walker 2015.
I mean, that's definitely possible. It is too early to tell. I mean, I'm not in denial that his poll results have not been that promising now, and Trump is in the lead and all that stuff. But like, I think about this time in the last election cycle, people were totally writing Trump off and saying, like, oh, and it's like we went from all the pundits being like Trump has like no chance of winning the um nomination to Trump is just inevitable until he like dies of old age. He will be our nominee. And yeah, I guess I think that there's sort of more opportunity for things to go differently than people assume they will than
Yeah.
some of these people.
There's still about 5.5 months until Iowa. So and Ron is apparently
Right.
Trump.
So I think it's a little premature to like write anyone off. I mean, I'm not saying that he's in a great position, but it's a little bit premature to. I mean, sometimes even like 3 weeks before Iowa, some candidate surges and wins Iowa, and then the race could look totally different. A week
I mean, that's
after
what happened with
Iowa.
Obama. That's what happened with Obama.
Right. So the people that are like, oh, like almost 6 months before any election starts, we know for sure who the nominee is going to be. Like, no, you actually don't. It may be fair to say that the front runner is most likely to stay the front runner. I mean, that may be fair to say, people usually have too much of a degree of certainty. And I think the thing is that with political pundits, like no one's going to listen to them if they actually were like, well, this is somewhat likely to happen. If they're like, this is what's going to happen, then they get more attention. And I guess they just assume that when they're wrong, people will just kind of forget about it. So,
Yeah.
um,
I mean, well, it's fair to say that, I mean, just point out at this point in 2015, Trump was in the lead. So, um, I mean, Tim Scott, though, I think is running a very promising campaign. If he can just gain traction in the polls, I mean, he's the kind of Republican that I would have, that I always liked.
right. There are a lot of people, even people who supported Trump before. I know several of them personally who supported Trump before, but think that Trump is too old. He's had his time. He needs to move on, and someone, younger needs to take his place. That's not, uncommon for people to feel that way. So, yeah, I mean, there's still plenty of, it's not necessarily going to happen, but there's still opportunities for, I think, a Republican to come along who can like attract the people that, never really liked Trump and the people that just, think that Trump has had his day and it's time to move on to someone else. I don't know that, I mean, at first it looked like Ron DeSantis had the best opportunity to do that. And I mean, his campaign isn't doing as well as was hoped, um, but I mean, that doesn't mean that someone else won't emerge who's able to
To say that
be
it's not doing as well, it's a bit of an understatement. Like there's a joke in my circle of friends that DeSantis is running a campaign that's targeted at 12 people on Twitter and not the GOP primary electorate. uh,
but he has been like number two for a while, but also it seems like he's faded, and then that could push him to do even more attention grabbing stuff that's maybe not really
that
helpful in the
video
long.
from the beginning of the month was not attention grabbing enough.
Well, I mean, oftentimes when people's campaigns aren't doing as well, start to flounder, then they sometimes do things that sort of enhance their demise. Although in Trump's case, he just always did crazier and crazier things, and then people just thought it was cool, and then he got more support. But usually, the other people it doesn't work so well
Yeah,
for.
it's what my friends call the Fifth Avenue test. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hate to end on a depressing note. So um let's talk about Joe Biden. Like, has how have things been going for him late? Like has he made any more decisions that were just downright stupid or bad, or has he actually been running a tighter ship?
I'm not sure if he himself how much he himself is running at all, but um I mean, I don't think he's done anything as bad as, in my opinion, the way he's handled Afghanistan. The Biden administration continues to defend themselves on Afghanistan. They even released a report and they basically blamed everybody except themselves for the debacle. They even blamed COVID for the debacle in Afghanistan in 2021. So, I mean, so they have done some stuff to try to help some of the allies left behind, but they've continued to like create obstacles to private groups helping Afghans and defend an indefensible record and whatnot. But mostly they just want everyone to forget about Afghanistan. I mean, that was the thing that affected me the most personally. So that is the thing that, will probably always be my number one thing that they've done. So I don't expect them to necessarily be able to top that. But that doesn't mean that I think they've done a great job after that. I think they seem to have done some work behind the scenes, like keep Turkey from attacking the Kurds, worse than they already have. I mean, not that they have stood up to Turkey the way they should, but I think they have done some stuff behind the scenes, because there were definitely some times that, like, Kurdish friends were like, oh, Turkey's totally going to invade Syria now. And then it didn't happen. And then I guess I would probably assume that was because of the US and some other countries saying, this would not be a good idea, Turkey. And then I don't really know what has gone on, like what went on behind the scenes to get Sweden and to get Finland into NATO and whatnot. So, I mean, I do think that those are positive things. And I think it's good that they have like chosen to support Ukraine. So yeah, I mean, I would say that Afghanistan still takes the cake for like the worst thing they've done, at least like in the foreign policy sphere. And I mean, I've been glad that they wanted to support Ukraine after that, but I wouldn't say that I'm like super thrilled with their, after Afghanistan, they turned over a new leaf. I think they've just sort of like quietly done a little better job of supporting our allies than, I mean, walking away and abandoning hundreds of thousands of people in Afghanistan was.
Right. We got to wrap this up here, Kristy. Thanks so much for coming on. Where can people follow you?
I am on Twitter at Kristy Perano. Yeah, I haven't been super active in recent weeks, but I'm gonna step it up.
Yeah. And
I'll
just
find your tweets again, since Elon doesn't think I should be seeing them.
yes, and based on our current track record, good luck finding her tweets as well.